What's going on, guys? Welcome to Chief Messenger. We have a great show ahead of us today. Today we're looking at Jordan Peterson going on a podcast with Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins, if you don't know him, a fervent atheist, a scientist, and a doctor, among other things. Let's just highlight some of the things that he asked Jordan Peterson right here. Let me show you this clip.
Because you don't think that Cain and Abel existed. I care about facts. I mean, did they exist or did they not exist? Well, of course they weren't real. Of course, even if they weren't real, of course they weren't real. I see no truth value in the claims of Christianity, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the miracles. Do you believe in any of those? Do you believe Jesus was born a virgin? This is Cain. I mean, you don't believe Cain actually existed, I presume.
I think that this is a great premise to the conversation that we're going to see ahead with Jordan Peterson and Richard Dawkins, because we see Richard Dawkins taking the truth crusade approach, saying that he's really the one that cares so much about facts and truth, when it's actually the opposite. You see, they're just trying to get Jordan to say a certain answer so they could back him in a corner and just make him seem a certain way. The questions of, you don't really believe Cain and Abel existed, I presume, is an oppositionary, hostile response that is actually a worthless question in the grand scheme of things and in this conversation. Jordan ends up answering this question that it really doesn't matter if Cain and Abel did exist or not, because it's not at the heart of the conversation as to why they're talking in the first place. We're going to get right into this conversation. There's some amazing highlights. I think this is one of the most eloquently spoken conversations that Jordan Peterson has ever had that I've personally seen. Maybe he's been like this for a long time. I think he has. But it really was so interesting to see Richard Dawkins and Alex O'Connor try to get a certain answer out of Jordan Peterson. They're trying to get him to say, yes, I did believe Cain and Abel were really real, physically existing, and that would have been able to corner him in a situation where they can say, oh, well, you don't base what you believe off facts, like we do. So let's get right into it right here. I think you guys are going to really enjoy some of these clips that I've picked out. It was an amazing conversation. Go watch the full thing below, but we're going to get right into it. Let's go.
The conflict between brothers, the rivalry between brothers, this is a fundamental pattern, which yes, it's something that's there. But I care about facts. I mean, did they exist or did they not exist?
Well, I can imagine a situation where when the story was originated, that it referred to two actual brothers. But as the stories propagate across time, as they mutate, as they adapt, let's say, to the structure of human memory, they deepen and they become broader. And so then they become emblematic not only of the pattern of conflict that might characterize the original two brothers that the story was about, but about the conflict between brothers as such, and then the more fundamental levels of conflict that exist within human beings, which is what you see in more sophisticated literature. It's like the biblical accounts speak of fact in a factual manner upon occasion, but the biblical accounts also speak poetically and metaphorically and allegorically, and people who are sophisticated in biblical analysis have known this for centuries. The biblical literalists generally suffer from the problem that they don't even know what it means to be literalist. There's lots of unsophisticated ways of approaching a text.
Okay, let's see what Professor Dawkins thinks about that.
Well, I suppose I'm a literalist. I mean, and you give the game away when you say Cain and Abel were the first humans to be born in a natural way.
Well, I'm speaking allegorically there within the confines of the text. I mean, what I meant by that was that the way the story lays itself out is that Adam and Eve are created by God. And so they're not emblematic of the pattern of human beings that exist in fallen history. Within the confines of the text, the first two people who are genuine, who aren't creations of the divine, are Cain and Abel. And so for me, they're emblematic of the patterns of conflict that rip people apart in the world of history, in the world of normal history.
Let's pause this right here. I think you saw that Dawkins is so ready to make a conclusion about Jordan based on his answer. He wants him to say yes so that he can paint him as some sort of Bible thumper that just believes things without any facts or truth, when really Jordan Peterson's answer is that it's basically hyper real. These are emblematic of people throughout history, and whether it's based on real people or not is irrelevant to the conversation that they're having. I believe that these different stories are metaphors, and a lot of them can be allegories, and they can be real as well. It's very possible that Cain and Abel were real, two human beings, which I personally believe, but Jordan Peterson eloquently displays his knowledge on the Bible and on the teachings that are in it, when Dawkins is just trying to press him into a corner to get him to answer a question specifically so that he can win the debate without actually trying to have a conversation on why is Christianity one of the world religions that led us to science, medicine, and the scientific endeavor overall, among many other things, an upstanding society. And that's kind of what Jordan gets into. So I just wanted to point that out, that these questions that I only picked out a few are leading Jordan into a corner. Let's continue.
Professor Dawkins, I know you take particular umbrage with that statement that Cain and Abel were the first normally born human beings, but I think if I understand Dr. Peterson correctly, there are things that can be sort of true within a story. It's true that Sherlock Holmes lives at 221B Baker Street, and as far as I understand, that's maybe what you mean by the truth in the matter of Cain and Abel being the first naturally born humans. It's internal to the story.
Well, in the context of this story, they're the first two spirits or patterns you could think of, patterns of perception and action,
yes,
that characterize human existence in the fallen world, right? So they're emblematic of what happens in history outside of the whatever is meant by the pre-existent paradise.
But at the same time, you must know, I know this comes up all of the time when somebody says, but did Cain and Abel really exist? And I know that you want to say that the story which
I think it's a silly question. I think it's like asking whether Raskolnikov existed in Crime and Punishment. Like it's not a trivial question, because you can answer yes, and you can answer no. You can say, well, there was no such specific person as Raskolnikov. But it's not a helpful question, because the reason that Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment is a masterpiece is because Raskolnikov was everywhere in Russia when Dostoevsky wrote Crime and Punishment. And so Raskolnikov is hyper-real, not real.
But to be clear, is that how you feel about Cain and Abel? That is to say, an identifiable
hyper-real
Homo sapiens called Cain,
it's irrelevant.
who murders his brother.
In a sense, it's irrelevant to me, because even if they were real, like, we don't know anything about them as historical figures.
Even if they weren't real, of course they weren't real.
Well, like I said, it could have been the case that when the story originated, way back when it originated, that the first people that were described by the first person who generated the seeds of the Cain and Abel story were referring to actual people. But it doesn't matter, because the text is being compressed and modified over a vast span of time, and it's accreted all sorts of meanings that certainly weren't part and parcel of whatever the original story was.
Let's take the point Alex was making. Within the confines of the story, Dostoevsky was a great writer. What makes you think the writers of Genesis were a great writer? I mean, who were they? We know nothing about them.
Dawkins is looking to corner Peterson. When Peterson is looking for advancements in the conversation, is it real, is the question that they keep asking. Well, what does that even mean? It can be a metaphor, it can be based on real people, and ultimately it has great moral value. Just like they're saying, within the context of the story, Cain and Abel are very real. Harry Potter is very real within the context of the story. That's not to say that Cain and Abel probably did not happen. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that Jordan Peterson's response is a backlash at people to say, well, it's not real, right? Oh, we shouldn't put any moral standing on what it says in the Bible. That's where Dawkins is getting at, is that we shouldn't allow the Bible to tell us anything about life, because we can't prove scientifically that it's real. Now, I believe we can scientifically prove many things in the Bible that are real, and he's kind of stuck up on this question, and he continues to ask it throughout this conversation. It's trying to paint Jordan and people like him into a category of people that are Bible thumpers and base their ideas on things that are not fact. And so we see Dawkins taking this truth crusade approach. I only think of things that are fact. If it's based on fact, I believe it. If it's not, I don't believe it. In this next part, we have Richard Dawkins explaining why he said in his book that he was a cultural Christian, right? And then he ends up kind of having to fall back on his statement and deflect. So let's get right into that.
You made a statement a couple of months ago that I found very interesting. And I don't claim to understand it, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot with it. You said that you were a cultural Christian. Okay, and so that raised a number of questions in my mind. And the first question was,
You are changing the subject.
No, I'm not. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I may be leaping outside of the topic a bit to
we
get
can
back to
do
it.
cultural Christianity, but I think, because I have a list of questions that you wanted to ask, and that is one of them. But I think Professor Dawkins did ask you...
You were referring to the predictive power and to the utility of the stories.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's actually what I was trying to zero in on.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that was the point. Well, it seemed to me that your proclamation that you were a cultural Christian was a recognition and a statement that you had found something in the culture that had been derived from Christianity that you had an affinity with, and that there's some reason for that. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, well, what do you think that Christianity got right that allows you to make a statement like that? I mean, I know that there's differences perhaps in what we both think about the ultimate veracity of the biblical stories. Maybe there isn't differences. Like, it would take a lot of conversation to figure this out, but what did you mean by that? Like, what do you think that Christianity got right that would enable you to make a statement like that?
Virtually nothing. I meant by that no more than that I'm brought up in a Christian culture. I went to Christian schools. I therefore know my way around the Bible. I know my way around the Book of Common Prayer. I know the hymns. That's all. I don't value Christianity as a truth system at all.
Of course he's a cultural Christian. We all are if you were born into the modern Western world with our running water and technology and scientific advancements that make us live longer. Like we said before, the scientists of the past, many of them were Christian, and the morals of Christianity have led us to where we are today. And so this next part is going to be great because Jordan actually pushes back and finally gets the edge on Dawkins, explaining to him that you have to give Christianity some sort of respect, right? He has no respect for the religion or the moral standard that Christianity has brought forth into our world today, and it's foolish to suggest not. And so this is a big mistake that he makes where when he said he was a cultural Christian, I think we all know what he meant, right? I think he knows deep down, unless Jordan doesn't push it, which he ends up pushing it, that yes, you have to look around and see that this world today was basically built on Christian values. America itself, what the West stands for, freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, was built on Christian values. So it's going to be a great thing to see Jordan have to basically force this answer out of Dawkins and say, yeah, I don't really believe that you're saying, oh, I don't take anything out of Christianity. There's nothing in there that tickles my fancy. So we're going to see a great little pushback here from Jordan Peterson. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so let me ask you about that, because maybe that's true and perhaps it's not. So the first question is, like, do you think that there are any marked differences between cultural traditions that would enable you to rank order them in terms of their ethical validity?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so for example, we could contrast mainstream UK Christianity with Islamic fundamentalism.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a hierarchy.
There is a hierarchy.
Okay, a hierarchy that points to what?
Well, in the case of Islam, I dislike any religion which punishes apostasy with death, that throws gay people off high buildings, that practices clitoridectomy. That seems to me to place Islam on a lower level than Christianity, but that's not to say anything very positive about Christianity.
Well, it might be to say something positive about Christianity. Like, I think that question is open, because you might ask yourself, what did Christianity get right that led it away from those particular presumptions and towards something that you regard as more ethically appropriate? Like, this isn't a trivial question.
It's a very modest claim. There's not very much. I mean, to be better than a religion that throws gay people off high buildings is not really a very virtuous achievement.
I don't know. I don't know if that's true, because if you look at the barbarism that characterizes the human past, you might think that any progression whatsoever towards something approximating mercy and tolerance is nothing short of a bloody miracle.
Well,
like, people are pretty ruthless, and so are our chimpanzee cousins.
Yes, they are.
Right. So,
yes.
So we move forward into the light with great difficulty.
Yes,
and
yes.
The fact that we can take that for granted now, and that it seems self-evident and deserving of faint praise, it's not so clear to me that that's a reasonable proposition.
Okay, let's grant the faint praise, but that has nothing to do with the truth value, and what I care about is the truth value. I see no truth value in the claims of Christianity, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the miracles. Do you believe in any of those? Do you believe Jesus was born a virgin?
Yeah, let's give it some faint praise. Let's give Christianity some faint praise to the millions, maybe billions of people who have had their lives changed by the teachings of Jesus Christ. It just needs some faint praise. You know, the scientists and innovators who were led by the guiding light of God to their creations and their innovations, just some faint praise. And now they get into about the hierarchy of religions and how you value Christianity over some other religions and what they stand for. And that's where Dawkins is pushed into a corner to say, well, yeah, I mean, Christianity has some pretty good morals compared to other world religions who maybe have cannibalism, voodoo, right? So obviously Christianity is not on the same moral standing as other religions. When you actually see it acted out in the people that are Christians, they live much better lives than the people of other religions. And we have the West built today on the backbone, which is the Christian values, right? The guiding light of God has led us to where we are today. And so it's just an amazing thing that Richard Dawkins was basically forced to give Christianity its faint praise, as he calls it. And he was not wanting to do so simply because him giving Christianity any sort of praise is to show that there is truth in it. Of course there's truth in it. He doesn't want to, he has no interest in the faith claims that are within the Bible, but at the end of the day, I think he can't see the spiritual truth, right? I think he is cut off from the spiritual truth. Jesus said, if I tell you physical things and you don't believe me, you're not going to believe me on spiritual things. So we'll put that verse up on the screen and we're going to get right back into it. Dawkins asks Peterson, do you believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ? Interesting answer here. Let's see what he says.
In the claims of Christianity, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the miracles, do you believe in any of those?
As I said before, there are elements of the text that I don't feel qualified to comment on. My experience has been that the more, I know from a metaphorical perspective and from a mythic perspective what the story of the virgin birth means, and I accept that. I know, for example, that any culture that doesn't hold the image of the woman and infant sacred dies.
Do you mean
and I don't know how that needs to be expressed in a form.
Is it true, though?
Do you mean that you don't know?
Well, let me ask you about that, because truth, this is something I talked with Sam Harris about too. Truth, as we know, is a tricky business. Do you think there are differences in the truth claims between different writers of fiction? Like, is Dostoevsky more profound than...
No, well, I wouldn't call fiction truth claims anyway. I mean, these are...
Then on what grounds do we rank order the fiction in terms of quality? Like, Dostoevsky is a profound purveyor of fiction on the philosophical front, unbelievably deep and profound.
Yes,
there's something true about what he's writing about.
It's nothing to do with the truth that science is concerned with. The truth of science is the truth that gets us to the moon. I mean, this is nothing to do with whether one writer of fiction has a sort of insight into human nature. That goes without saying. I accept that.
Okay, so how do we deal with the notion that on the purely factual side, how do we deal with the idea, let's take you talked about clitoridectomy, let's talk about the oppression of women.
Yes.
We make a scientific case that that's inappropriate? Or is it a case that we're making on some other grounds? Like, I see in the Judeo-Christian tradition, one of the earliest pronouncements is that both men and women carry the image of God, both. And that sets a certain tone to everything that follows. And it is a remarkable proclamation, given its radical age, that both men and women carry the image of God and are to be treated as something with intrinsic value outside of the domain of power and politics. And it isn't obvious to me, having thought about this a lot, how we deal with that in the pure realm of fact. Because one of the facts is, if I can oppress you, why the hell shouldn't I?
So let's break this down if you're not fully following, because I want you to get this. This is one of the best answers I've heard to this question, right? They ask, do you think it was real? And Jordan goes on to say, well, society crumbles without God. And then he says, based on the moral arguments and the logic that is within the Bible, you can determine that the validity of it is within there, because how do we judge the truth claims that are within fiction, right? Certain books are higher quality than others. You can't have any sort of statistical analysis on the quality of a book or the quality of somebody's morals. You could see certain moral societies that degrade because they do not have the same morals. Now, there's no statistical scientific analysis to these moral standards. You can't have some sort of scientific test using physical elements and test tubes to determine whether somebody's morals are good or not. And so Jordan is saying, if I can oppress you, Why shouldn't I, right? According to science, there's nothing to say whether you can or can't. This is a moral argument. And so what you find within the Bible is divine authorship due to the logic that it has within it, due to the prophecies that are fulfilled, due to the profound teachings that are found within the Bible. There is definitely truth that is within the Bible, whether Dawkins wants to admit it or not. And so Dawkins is just so focused on the facts, when you can look around and see the facts around you with America and the science being progressed by Christianity. I kind of keep harping on that, but it's such a good point, right? You see science getting to where it is, the scientific endeavor, due to people pursuing what they thought to be truth through God, right? They were following the spirit of truth, and they discovered many things. Many scientists were Christians, a lot of them a long time ago. Of course they believed in God. Of course they believed in a creator. It says the fool in his heart believes there is no God. And so Dawkins just wants him to admit that, yeah, there's no factual evidence of the Bible, when Jordan's like, there's so much more proof than simple statistical analysis, right? Or simple factual analysis. You can't base your morality on statistics. That's not how life works. There's no statistical study that you can do as to what morality is better than the other. So I think it was a really good answer. And I think he is dissecting what Dawkins is saying. And he's honestly, at this point in the conversation, he's got the edge now. I definitely recommend to go watch the whole thing. Listen to what Jordan has to say. Yeah, a lot of really, really good things. It's going to get a lot more interesting, y'all. I'm pretty enthralled in this conversation. So let's go on. There was so much good stuff, and I can only show you so much. I can only show you so much. So right now, we're going to get into a topic where they asked whether the authors of Genesis were divinely inspired to write the Bible, or were they just literary geniuses? And so Dawkins says, what makes you think that the authors of Genesis were great writers? We know nothing about them.
Within the confines of the story, Dostoevsky was a great writer. What makes you think the writers of Genesis were a great writer? I mean, who were they? We know nothing about them.
Well, I think they were great writers because I think I understand the patterning of the stories and what it points to. I think the idea, for example, that Cain and Abel are emblematic of two opposed patterns of adaptation to the world is brilliant. It's almost brilliant beyond imagining, especially because the story is so insanely compressed.
He asks, what makes you think the authors of Genesis were great writers? We know nothing about them. So his line of thinking is, these people were terrible writers, right? We know nothing about them. What makes you think they were such literary geniuses? Well, you have two options here, okay? They either were terrible writers, and then that would mean that the Bible was divinely inspired, okay? It's either that they were terrible writers and they were divinely inspired because all of the prophecies, all of the profound wisdom and teachings that were in it cannot be explained away by they were terrible writers. And so he's asking a question that he's losing because the only other option is he has to admit that they were literary geniuses or they were terrible writers and it was divinely inspired. That's the only two options. And of course the question, I don't think he understands that. He's just trying to corner Jordan Peterson again. But he must admit that they were amazing writers and that there is great use in studying the Bible because it's one of the best writings of all time, if not the best. And he doesn't want to admit that when pushed with the fact. He's oppositionary just to be oppositionary. Let's get to another great part of this conversation.
Not divine inspiration necessarily, but more than just, as I say, naive human authorship. Not like someone just sat down and wrote stories.
At minimum, it's a staggeringly brilliant literary move, especially given the fact that relationship hasn't been explicated before.
Do you think, for example, if you were looking in Scripture for something which would identify this as a God-given text, maybe you as a scientist would look for some scientific information. It might have told you the shape of DNA or something like that. But do you think
which Jordan actually thinks, yeah.
Yeah, we can perhaps get onto that. But do you think that a literary brilliance of a similar kind or a similar intensity, that if the Bible is not a scientific text, you might be looking for some scientific fact which you couldn't have otherwise known? Is it possible that some kind of genius moral move or literary move could also indicate that this is something more impressive?
You more or less asked me what would impress me, and I'm a naive literalist, and so I would say, if any prophet had said something like, the world is just one object in rotating around the sun, something like that. They never do. I mean, it's always some kind of moral lesson which leaves me cold.
That shows the foolishness of Richard Dawkins. He's asked a simple question about if you can't find specific information that the Bible is true, right? Just if you can't find something in the Bible that is just specific factual information, maybe you can find literary elements that it's divinely inspired, right? Is that even a possibility in your mind, is what Alex asks him. You saw his answer. He reverts back and says, well, maybe if they said that it was a globe, I'd believe it. He can't even interpret the question. That a literary brilliance, as brilliant as scientific proof of the Bible, could prove its divine authorship. Well, guess what? Perhaps 300 plus prophecies fulfilled by Jesus and the cross-referencing which proves a statistical anomaly might prove to you some sort of literary element that shows it was divinely inspired. Or how about the profound wisdom that has changed millions of people's lives? Now we can just throw that out. Just give it its faint praise. Just give it some faint praise, right? Christianity didn't do anything for anybody. But we see that the nature of his response totally deflects the question. Honestly, that's kind of where we leave this off, guys. Richard Dawkins, to me, is like a man who went into a gold mine having never heard of gold before and only knows of paper money. He comes out and says, why does anybody want to go in there? It's just a bunch of this yellow stuff. And so he's opening the Bible, reading the profound things in it, and he's only looking for something that says quantum entanglement theory or the earth is a globe, and it would prove to him, wow, they knew this back in the day. That's divine authorship. He doesn't know what divine authorship is, and he can't perceive spiritual truth. He can see these profound teachings right in front of him, but he can't perceive them. And so that's an amazing thing I want to leave off here. If you want to see the rest of the conversation, I definitely recommend to go watch the rest of it. That's kind of my commentary on the whole thing. Jesus can show you things beyond the physical. Believe me, that's what happened for me. And I can show you physical things of the Bible being true. Think of the sulfur balls that are in ancient Sodom, the proof of King David existing, or the proof of a burnt mountain where Moses was, and a split in the rock in the Middle East where Moses might have struck the rock and water came out. Many people think that they know where the ark is, but that's just some things that Dawkins might push off and say, well, the Bible's not true, but yeah, there's a bunch of scientific evidence and there's a bunch of spiritual evidence and literary elements that can prove it's real. But nah, we're not going to believe in it. That's my show today, guys. Thank you for watching Chief Messenger. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great rest of your week. All praise be to Jesus Christ. Peace.